Independent Sources, your window to the city's ethnic and immigrant communities. Here's your host, Garry Pierre-Pierre.
Welcome to the first show of our 9th season. Every week between now and November 8th, we will focus on different aspects of this very controversial presidential race. Today, we'll be looking at one of the most contentious issues of the election, immigration. Republican candidate for President Donald Trump has staked his entire campaign on promising to deport more than 11 million people who are undocumented. He has also promised to build a wall along the Mexican border and restricting entry of Muslims to the U.S. Meanwhile, Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton disagrees and has pledged to integrate undocumented immigrants into American society. Joining me today to discuss this topic are Nida Khan, freelance journalist, and Dr. David Kuranga, Associate Adjunct Political Science Professor at CUNY. Before we start the conversation, let's see what New Yorkers think of the candidates.
If I had to choose a candidate, it wouldn't be Donald Trump. I'll just say it like that, okay?
None of them. It's funny, I was leaning towards Gary Johnson up until his Aleppo comment. I don't know if you've had. And for a while I leaned towards Trump because of the veteran thing, but I hate being a one-issue voter. I think it's self-centered.
Definitely Hillary Clinton. I think there are some issues with both candidates. I don't think either of them are the ideal candidate, but definitely more towards Hillary's social policies.
Actually, none of them, because I'm not in favor of none of their policies, especially Donald Trump. But that doesn't mean I'm in favor of Hillary Clinton. But, for now, Hillary Clinton is the better option than Donald Trump.
Trump. I think Hillary Clinton's a liar. I'm not saying Trump is the greatest, but, if somebody's going to run the country, there's no question he's the guy.
Of course, Hillary Clinton, yeah. She's, to me, she's more for the whole movement of women, abused women, domestic violence, hunger, things of that nature. So
I'm going for me. I'm going for, I walk through this city and help people. And I'm not going to wait for some candidate to make the world better. I'm going to do it myself.
Nita, so there was a time when immigration was considered the third rail of politics. Why has it become one of the most important issues in this presidential race?
Well, I mean, Donald Trump himself said it, right? He's the one who brought it into this race, which he did by calling Mexicans rapists, by saying they were drug dealers, by calling for the wall, a ban on Muslims. So he very much played into this notion and into this narrative and riled up his base through that. So, of course, it's become a huge issue. And we see him now, in his so-called alleged pivot that he's doing to the general, that he's actually not really stating whether he's going to deport the 11 million undocumented people that are here. He's sort of just kind of like, we're going to deport as many as possible. We're going to do what we can, and not actually definitively giving an answer on that now. So it's interesting to watch, a year later, how he's still using this to still sort of rile up the base, but keep it, ambiguous so that he can get some people who may be unsure either way onto his side.
Dr. Kuranga, same question. Why is this such a key issue in this presidential race?
I think in general, the premise of both parties was to have a similar view on immigration. A lot of people, the dirty little secret is that the economic establishment in America has actually been in favor of undocumented immigration because it keeps wages down. And then the Democratic Party.
But it's also the other side of that argument. It's a very valid argument, but it's a source for them to get labor. There's a lot of jobs that native-born or legal immigrants won't do, and so they're looking for ways to fill these jobs.
Yes, certainly the guest worker program with the farms and what have you. A lot of members of the economic establishment have favored this quietly, as well as on the right, on the left. You have members of the Democratic Party and people on the left who favored it for other reasons. So in general, there hasn't been anyone who's really attacked the issue. And then introducing Trump, who's against the establishment, both the economic establishment and the political establishment of both parties, and then he makes this a major issue. He strikes a chord with people who have seen this issue not been addressed by anyone. And you have a bipartisan agreement with the Gang of Eight who are looking towards a
comprehensive
legalization, and you have Trump bringing forth a alternative view that looked like it was dying until he emerged, and then you have it resonate with so many people for a myriad of reasons, and that's why it is an issue that is a signature issue for his campaign in particular, and an issue that does have an impact on a large segment of the American population that previously may have not been as active in electoral politics.
Nida, is it really because of the rhetoric that we're discussing this, or is it because both sides see this as a major problem that we need to deal with? You mentioned the Gang of Eight. Well, they've been talking about immigration reform for years and nothing. And now, when Trump comes and calls, us all kinds of names, and all of a sudden it's being talked about everywhere.
Right. I think it's twofold, because you do have, even if you look at undocumented folks that are here, they also want comprehension immigration reform, right? Like, pretty much this is across the board. They want to be included in society. They want a solution. And you see from both sides, people have been discussing this. Obama tried with DAPA and DACA. It stalled in the Supreme Court. And, Clinton is saying that she's going to be in favor of that, push for that. And we hear a lot of talk about it, but we don't see any substantive results here. And if you look at Clinton, even what she's proposing, like, a lot of it hinges on the fact that Democrats will take over the Senate, because she's counting on that in order for them to push through.
We're going to discuss that a little further. So.
Okay, sorry. I'm jumping ahead here. But then it also goes back to the idea that it is the rhetoric too. So that's definitely brought it to the forefront, because Trump saw this, right? And he played on people's fears, because there are very real economic fears, and there's a big segment of society that's been ignored. Like, the economy has improved, obviously, since Obama's been in office, but there's people that are in lower wage jobs, in the middle class sector too, who they haven't felt the effects of that economic benefit. And for a long time, the GOP establishment has been really great in getting people to vote against their own interests, especially their economic interests. So Trump sort of saw this, seized on it, and made them believe that he's the person who's going to, be their voice, be the person that they can identify with, and his message has resonated with it. So I think it's both. I think it's a very real issue, but then it's also the fact that he's made this such a huge thing by playing on people's insecurities or fears or any apprehensions that they may have.
David, when you look at the average Trump supporter, why is that supporter feel under siege by immigrants?
Well, it's the economic argument, I think, and people are concerned about the economy among his voters, probably more than any other issue. And I think people are losing sight of the fact of how many people have seen their incomes decline. There are people who in the 90s were making more money than they're making today. And this is a problem for these people. The so-called economy has improved, but not for everyone. If you look at the numbers for other people, it hasn't improved. These are the people who are listening to Trump. They were also listening to Sanders, but now they don't have him, so they're listening to Trump. And Trump is saying that, you deal with this underclass of people who are taking these jobs, your plight could improve.
But how true is that? How many, illegal or undocumented immigrant are taking over jobs that native-born Americans want and can have? It's more rhetoric or than reality?
I would think it's an economic argument. Real wages in America have gone down.
Beyond that, that's true. But let's focus on because Trump has, his message is very simple. Illegal immigrants are the ones who are responsible for your lot.
Right.
And so the question is, how true is that?
Right. I don't think it even matters whether or not it's true, right? It's just putting out that narrative and that idea and having people believe that it is true. So it's like when you have folks like you're talking about, and I was just saying too, that haven't seen the benefits of any sort of economic improvement. And then you have also, remember, you have demographics that are changing. You have the so-called browning of America. It's, 2043, according to the U.S. Census, that's when people of color will outpace the white population. So you have all of that combining with, they haven't seen any sort of real substantive improvement in their own lives. So it's making them think that it's because of people that are coming over that are taking their jobs, even though, like, I know you're alluding to it, that it's not necessarily true that these immigrants, especially undocumented immigrants that are here, that they're the ones taking those jobs. Because as we know, they do a lot of the under the table, low wage stuff that I don't think most Americans would even want to do.
I don't think it's an absolute situation. It's a marginal thing where I think there is some truth to it in some communities and in some areas that wages have remained stagnant and or declined, particularly in some sectors. However, it's a globalization game here, and maybe without this underclass of workers, these companies and these jobs entirely would have left. And that's another issue that Trump is also trumpeting, the fact that companies are leaving. So it's an issue like, are these workers bringing wages down for everyone, or are they helping keep business here by providing, some kind of competitive advantage for business to actually stay here, to have some kind of low-wage workers, so they don't necessarily have to go abroad to get that. So economically, I've seen the arguments on both sides. I think it depends on who you ask and the communities that you're looking into. Certainly in some communities, I think it has hurt more than others, and that's something that affects them. So to say that there's no truth at all to that, I think is not seeing the full picture. There's certainly some truth that it has taken jobs away and brought incomes down, but there's also the argument that they may have actually kept companies here that may have left.
I think
let's move on to Hillary Clinton's take on this. Obviously, we think we know where she stands, but where does she stand on the issues?
I mean, so she's obviously, if you listen to what she says and what her plan is in terms of comprehension immigration reform, she is much more inclusive. She said she's about bringing people out of the shadows, helping them get English language skills so they can actually go and become citizens. But like I was just alluding to earlier, that a lot of this hinges on the fact that she's planning, or she's hoping that Democrats will take over the Senate because she needs them in order to push for support for DAPA and DACA and anything else she wants to do as part of the comprehensive immigration reform. And aside from that, it's like, this is what I question, like, what is the solution then if Democrats don't win the Senate? If they don't win it, then it's like we're basically going to be in the same place where we are. And I think there's not enough being done in terms of immigration reform for all of these different scenarios. It's just kind of like, okay, we're going to do X, Y, and Z if we win the Senate and if I get elected. But then, what if those things don't happen? Where are we then?
Is she galvanizing the immigrant communities? Is she doing outreach beyond just the typical drive-by speeches and whatnot?
I think she certainly is. I think the Democratic Party and the Democratic strategists have been trying to tap into that community for years, and this is their big, I think, real coup on that community. So I don't look at it as a Democrat-Republican issue. I don't think this is one of those issues at all. I look at it more as an establishment and an anti-establishment issue based on the fact of the candidates that we're looking at and the policy positions that they're taking. There are plenty of establishment Republicans, for other reasons, that do want to see. The Gang of Eight had a lot of Republicans on there. It wasn't just Democrats. Mm-hmm. And I think regardless of who takes control of the Senate, there is a possibility to get some kind of reform through if Hillary Clinton wins. So the economic establishment wants some kind of legalization for these workers. They want this underclass of workers to be here because it helps them. Right. And that's a lot of Republicans. And they are major donors to some of these lawmakers, even if the Democrats do not take control. And the Democratic strategists want to see not just a legalization, but a path to citizenship. Mm-hmm. Why? Because they see this group of voters, if they champion this issue, if they become legal citizens, and particularly their kids who are citizens, they can rely on this voting bloc for generations to come, and they will turn whole states. We're talking about Arizona, Utah, states like Georgia, and states in the South that are considered red now. But if actually this population becomes legal citizens, voting public, they can actually win over these states. And Democratic strategists have for a long time been trying to champion this issue of getting undocumented immigrants legalized and become voters so that they can use that to expand the influence of their party across the country. And Republicans are not willing to concede that and allow them to do that. So that's why you're seeing more Republican strategists now, like the Gang of Eight, tap into this issue and say, wait a minute, we can do something for this community.
But if it did, though, what happened? How did we get to Donald Trump being the nominee for the Republican Party? His message was counter to what you just said on the Republican side.
Yeah, he's against the establishment. Clinton, I think, is the establishment, and he's against the establishment. So he is rejecting what the economic establishment wants and what the political establishment wants.
Well, can you go far? I mean, it's one thing to take on one establishment, but can you take on both establishments and still get your way?
Do you mean in terms of Donald Trump?
Donald Trump is immigration policy.
Right. I mean, well, that's basically what he's proving right now, right? That you can be supposedly against both establishments or the establishment in general and get people on your side. And to your point, I would say the Republican establishment obviously, is much more supportive in terms of some form of immigration reform, but Donald Trump isn't, and he, not to the extent that these leaders are, and he's in favor of the wall, as he said, and all the other things we went through, and he's tapped into what the people, what the base, and what the population has been feeling in that sector of society, and we see that has been very, very beneficial for him. I mean, that's really what's riled up a lot of these people.
David, you mentioned Donald Trump bucking the economic and political establishment, but is he pitting the two most vulnerable groups in our society, the undocumented immigrants and poor white people, against each other? And is that a winning strategy?
Republicans have used it as a winning strategy for years. Remember, they have effectively removed poor white Americans from supporting African Americans in the South. They've been doing this for years. What Trump has done is he's pivoted this, and he's now looking at white America and the undocumented workers, undocumented immigrants. And he's not afraid of these people as such because they can't vote. So as long as they're not voters, he doesn't have to worry about them. He has to worry about people who can actually vote. And in this case, a lot of these people, too, they don't vote in as high percentages as we're going to see coming out in this election. So he's tapped into what he calls a silent majority, a group of people who don't vote. I mean, there's groups like Bikers for Trump. I mean, I've never heard of bikers being major voters. They're going to be a major voting bloc in this election. And working class people who don't vote typically are going to now come out and vote for Trump because he's speaking their language. He's talking about things that do affect them, and that.
But it's talking about them. But has he offered any solutions to these problems?
No, I mean, he's made them believe that he's going to create jobs, that he's going to fix the economy, improve their lives personally, but there's no concrete plan. We don't know. It's a lot of rhetoric, and it's resonating with folks, but we don't see any, substantive solutions. I haven't seen anything. I don't know if you guys have, but there's not, we haven't seen anything at all. There's no details. There's no concrete steps towards how he's going to build these jobs, how he's going to fix the economy, how he's going to improve their lives. Yeah, he's going to build a wall, have Mexico pay for it, which now, we don't even know if that's going to happen.
Is immigration at the base of it an economic argument, or the case against immigrants coming here? Is that a...
He's using it as his anti-globalization argument. Both the undocumented workers coming in and jobs and companies going abroad. It's one thing to him, and it's one thing to these people who he's speaking to. Mm-hmm. So to say that he hasn't had specific examples, he has been very specific that he is against these free trade deals.
What about his speech,
but that's not a solution.
In Arizona a couple of weeks ago?
He gave what he called a 10-point agenda. I would call a 7-point agenda, where he was very, very specific. One, he wants to build the wall. 2, he wants to end this catch and release policy. 3, he wants to try and go after the undocumented workers who have committed crimes. I think those are about the same thing. 4, he wants to remove funding from sanctuary cities, all federal funding. That includes medical, schools, bridges, sanitation systems. Any type of federal funding that a sanctuary city or county is getting from the federal government, they are subject to lose under a Trump presidency. 5, he said something about this extreme vetting, which is what he's talking about, the people who come from people who come from Islamic countries, or people who identify as being Muslims. He wants to make sure that whoever those people are, they at least accept or kind of, I don't know how they plan to do this, but some kind of vetting thing to make sure that they support.
The ideological testing.
Yeah, the ideological test. They support, American values, whatever that may be. 6, he wants to roll out this biometric visa tracking. So that's a system in which you can track people from the visa overstays, which is a major group. And that policy that he's added wants to track those people to make sure that they leave when they're supposed to leave. He also wants to engage in the E-Verify, which is going to make it harder for undocumented workers to get jobs, and those who have overstayed their visas also to maintain employment. He said that he wants to cap the amount of people who can come here legally. And then the other things that he was talking about removing Obama's, executive orders goes without saying, as well as the forcing countries to accept people that they're sending back goes without saying as well. And this is his comprehensive agenda that he's laid out. It will have several effects. The wall will limit the amount of people who are coming here without documentation. And then the other steps are going to send people out at a much higher pace, and then limit the amount of people that are coming here legally, and make the life very hard for people who are here without documentation. He's going to increasingly make their life much more difficult.
And this is basically radically changing the fabric of America.
Absolutely. And he also, just to add to that, he also wants to end birthright citizenship. So basically, people who may come here undocumented or whatever.
That wasn't part of his 10-point agenda. So he's begun to walk that back. We'll see. He said it. He said it.
He said it several times.
Again, what is Clinton's remedy for the situation? What's her policy?
Her policy is to bring them out of the shadows, as she says, include them, and have, within the first 100 days that she's in office, she's going to push for the immigration reform. And, she hasn't done enough in terms of, to go back to your earlier question, in terms of reaching out to immigrant communities. Like, it's great to have certain forms of rhetoric, but it's another to actually go in these communities and actually talk to folks and explain to them what your plan is and why they need to support you. And I really don't think we've seen enough of that on her side at all whatsoever.
What options does she have? I mean, it seems from your analysis that without the Senate, this is going nowhere.
What options does she have?
Yeah.
In terms
of proposing something that we can chew on and debate, because frankly, I'm not sure what her policy is. Just like the way Trump laid out his, I want to do this, that, and the other. She hasn't. I mean, I know her rhetoric is that we're going to bring people together, but that we've been trying to do that for how long now?
Right, exactly, for a really, really long time. And I think that is a problem, because it's great that you're saying certain things and you're getting people on your side. You have a majority of people in the African American community, the Latino community, the Muslim community, the Asian community supporting you. But what are you actually doing to improve their lives, to improve immigrant communities? And I think it also goes back to the fact that we in these communities also have to hold who we elect accountable. Like, okay, we can all, if we want to, vote for Hillary Clinton, get her in office, but then you need to make sure that she's held accountable and you see some sort of change. You have certain, let's say, agenda marks that you want her to meet. And that's the problem, because Democrats often do take our votes for granted, and they...
Well, I guess that was Donald Trump's very awkward appeal to African Americans. What do you have to lose?
Right. What do you have to lose? And, and that's why he's able to put something like that out there, because it is true. Like, we do often just vote blindly, right? A lot of times because you hear such vitriol on the other side. So of course you're not going to go there. So then you vote on this side. But what are you really getting in return for that? We haven't seen in the years that we've had Obama in office, have we seen a lot of improvement in inner city communities? We've seen in immigrant communities, and that's why Donald Trump saw this and he seized on it very smartly. Like, he and his handlers are very, very smart in what they see out there and seize on it.
David, a couple of years ago, to many analysts and observers, the immigration issue was like a question of when, and if not if, and then it all fell apart. What happened? Why are we still back here, starting from scratch on immigration reform?
The issue is there is population in this country that were never in favor of this, and I think they were really pushed aside for the establishment that controlled the narrative. And this was just an assumption that you're just going to have to deal with these people. Then all of a sudden, Trump comes along and says, "No, you don't. You don't have to deal with this situation where people are coming in, they're going to stay in there. You're just undocumented workers or something you're going to have to deal with, and eventually they're going to be voters and everything else." That's something that he has said you don't have to accept that, and it's had so much popularity, and it's only given them one option, which was him. To what Hillary Clinton, I think Hillary Clinton is going to continue what President Obama has done. The Office of the Presidency has a lot of authority to do certain things, and I think through executive orders and through executive actions, and with using the power of the purse as well as other means of implementing policy. So to the point that she needs the votes in the Senate, I don't think that's the case at all. I think certainly if she's there, she's going to push these things harder. She's not going to be involved in the enforcement issue with respect to deportations, which are happening now under President Obama.
Speaking of that, because Obama is called deporter in chief because he's deported so many people.
Yes.
And so is Trump's idea of deporting 11 million people along the same line that President Obama is doing right now, or does he want to do like Gestapo, like house arrest?
I think Trump's deportation agenda is going to be what Obama is doing on steroids. Well, I don't think President Obama is doing anything near what Trump is suggesting, or has all these people who are undocumented who are in jails right now. They're gone in Trump. I'm very quick.
But that's the case here. I know for a fact once you commit a felony and you serve your time, you're deported. That's automatic, isn't it?
He's not even going to let them serve time. They're going to go. And even people who they catch and release. Sometimes people, if they're working and they're not really causing trouble, local officials will just let them go. That's not going to happen anymore. They're actually going to actually aggressively.
Now we're running out of time, but I want to get to the legality of all of this. Can any of this be done
legally?
Loaded
question. Yeah, and President Obama is, to your point, has deported more people than any other president ever in this country, which I think we always kind of like gloss over and forget that. So when you have somebody like Donald Trump saying that he's going to do even more than that, it's like, really, how is that even possible? How is that feasible? How is that going to be funded? He said he's going to, I believe, triple the amount of ICE enforcement officers. Like, are we really going to see that implemented? And how are you going to go about determining certain things aside from like whether or not if they commit a crime and then they're, like you said, held, how are we going to implement any sort of strategy? I don't think it's not economically and it's not really feasible to mass deport 11 million folks.
Are we going to have any resolution to this immigration issue post January?
If Trump is elected, I think you're going to see a huge shift. If it's Clinton, you're going to see a continuation of obviously what has been happening. She's actually probably going to pull back on the deportations that Obama was doing, but and try to get the legalization done. If Trump is elected, you're going to see that pick up drastically. On top of it, you're going to see what are called self-deportations. You're going to see people.
We heard that 4 years ago.
Their life is going to become. Trump is going to make their life here so difficult. He's going to go after employers that are employing these people. He's going to make their life so difficult that they're going to be like, listen, it's better I go back home or I can actually get a job, eat, and not have to deal with this big guy on my back. I
don't know if he's necessarily going to do that, because that in turn is going to hurt business. And remember, he's a business guy and he's about helping businesses build, and he wants to create jobs. I think it's what he's saying and implying right now, but not necessarily what he's going to end up doing if he is in office.
The E-Verify, I think the E-Verify is serious. I think, and also with the biometric, they've already started the biometric tracking with the visa overstays. I think some people are going to be like, listen, it's not worth it, and head out.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. We had a whole show about this topic, and we seem to have just scratched the surface. Thank you, Dr. David Kuranga and Nida Khan, for joining us today. From all of us at Independent Sources, see you next week.